Floodplain management is beginning to experience a paradigm shift. This has come about due to greater understanding of the ecosystem services provided by floodplains and the realization that humans cannot completely control water, as well as the predicted future flooding impacts that will be caused by climate change. Since local governments have the most authority in managing their floodplains and implementing floodplain regulations, they must be equipped to take on this paradigm shift. A comparative case study methodology was utilized to provide essential additional context on how local floodplain programs are implemented. 3 counties in Washington state were chosen as a unit of analysis for comparison. The specific research questions explored for this paper included: what are the key elements to an effective local floodplain management program? What are the major barriers that impede local governments in implementing floodplain regulations and complying with the National Flood Insurance Program, or NFIP? How can local governments improve their floodplain programs in an attempt to overcome these barriers? While components of strong organizational capacity were found to be key elements to an effective overall local floodplain management program, they do not necessarily correlate to compliance with NFIP. Low organizational capacity was found to be a major barrier to implementation and compliance, but high levels of organizational capacity are not required to implement floodplain regulations and be compliant with NFIP. The floodplain management component of the NFIP itself was found to be a major barrier to implementation and compliance. By taking advantage of education and training opportunities, including floodplain manager certification, local governments can begin to overcome implementation barriers and improve local programs. The results are intended to assist local government officials in overcoming barriers to implementing floodplain management programs and improving these programs in the face of climate change. The results may also prove useful to both state and national level floodplain management staff, helping them fine-tune training, outreach, and compliance programs directed to local government staff. Elected officials in local and/or state government may also be able to utilize this research to better understand the risk of unsafe floodplain development and what their agencies need in order to effectively manage floodplains in their jurisdictions. A case study methodology was chosen for addressing these issues since it was not possible to change any program variables for the evaluation and because there are many potential solutions to the problems. 2 NFIP participating counties in Washington state were chosen as a unit of analysis for comparison based on being similarly flood-prone but different in their overall compliance with NFIP. Another county was added to this case study due to the availability of its floodplain engineer to provide insight into the research questions. However, this county is much more flood-prone than the other 2, which was taken into account throughout the analysis. Counties were chosen as a unit of analysis rather than towns or cities, since there is more data available at the county level. Information about the county's NFIP compliance status, as well as number and cost of insurance claims and policies, were gathered from the FEMA Community Information System database. Experience working in the Washington Department of Ecology's floodplain management program provided insight into NFIP compliance issues and access to some of the professionals interviewed for this research. To provide context into the world of floodplain management at the national, state, and local levels, a large variety of data was gathered, such as previously conducted surveys of state and local floodplain officials, current NFIP statistics, and reports on work being done in Washington state. Interviews were also completed with floodplain management professionals in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. These interviewees offered insight into tools for improving local floodplain programs as well as the many barriers faced. To compare the 3 counties and determine their level of organizational capacity as well as the effectiveness of their floodplain management efforts, a mix of quantitative and qualitative data was collected and analyzed. The majority of this data was qualitative, looking at each county's regulatory and planning work involving floodplains. These 3 counties were compared regarding their differing floodplain management programs and regulatory implementation, as well as how these programs and implementation efforts matched up with the hypotheses created and listed here. Based on its non-compliance with NFIP, Clallam County was expected to have weak organizational capacity. The county seems to at least somewhat prioritize collaboration on floodplain-related issues, as suggested by the collaboration between Greg Ballard and its co-floodplain administrator, who is the county building official, and likewise by the fact the county has collaborated on restoration projects. It does not convey the impression of high competency in regard to floodplains, considering the lack of training and the small number of floodplain development permits the staff see. It sounds fairly committed to flood mitigation, as evidenced by its collaboration on restoration projects and by the floodplain planning done for the Dungeness River 12 years ago. However, Ballard admitted flooding isn't a big concern for them, since the county doesn't have much floodplain and/or developable area in its floodplains. Based on the fact it is compliant with the NFIP, Kitsap County was expected to have strong organizational capacity. The county does seem to at least somewhat prioritize collaboration on floodplain management issues, as indicated by floodplain restoration projects they have been involved in, and likewise by statements in their comprehensive plan and multi-hazard mitigation plan. In spite of this, based on the interview with the former floodplain administrator, there didn't look to be much collaboration on regulatory issues outside of the Department of Community Development. The county exhibits a fair level of competency around floodplain management, considering the training and certification of the former floodplain administrator. Evidence was found of some level of commitment to flood mitigation in the county, again based on statements in the comprehensive plan and multi-hazard mitigation plan, as well as restoration projects. Since Pierce County was added into this Capstone project after the first two counties were chosen, it doesn't quite fit into the original methodology proposed. It is much more flood prone than the other two counties, and it simply has more funding due to having a larger population. Considering it is non-compliant with the NFIP due to its open audit, the expectation was that it would have low organizational capacity. However, in view of its Class 2 rating and NFIP's community rating system, which incentivizes communities to implement flood mitigation measures, it would seem to have high organizational capacity. In regard to its floodplain management work, the county certainly prioritizes collaboration, though this collaboration can sometimes fail between county departments, as indicated by the problems FEMA has pointed out between its Shoreline Master Program rules and the NFIP rules. The county exhibits high competency in floodplain management, as evidenced by floodplain engineer Dennis Dixon's considerable amount of training and experience, the number of certified floodplain managers working for the county, and staff involvement with the Northwest Regional Floodplain Management Association. Yet, outside of Dixon's department, there can be misconceptions around flooding. He described how everyone is in their own silo and there's no natural mechanism to talk to each other, and every one of them has a role to play in floodplain management, and a few of them know that they have a role to play. The county is clearly committed to flood mitigation, which is confirmed by its standalone comprehensive flood hazard management plan, its basin plans, and comprehensive plan. The bottom line issue behind conducting this research was that local governments may not be effectively implementing and enforcing current environmental regulations that can help communities be more resilient to climate change. Using the NFIP as the example of environmental regulations, this issue was explored further. It was understood that the NFIP focuses more on building standards in hazardous areas and that these regulations are more of a minimum standard. But the study assumed that if local governments have trouble implementing and being compliant with the NFIP, then they will have even more trouble with further complex regulations that are likely to come about due to climate change and the paradigm shift happening in floodplain management. However, this research should only be considered an initial first step in exploring the overall topic. Future research could specifically look at the various aspects of organizational capacity in more detail to determine which components contribute most to effective programs or to NFIP compliance. After all, organizational capacity includes many things, and the components identified in this research, prioritizing collaboration, exhibiting high competency, and being committed to flood mitigation, are simply overarching themes. Further research could involve comparing local governments in states that do not have additional complex environmental rules like Washington does. By doing this, the research may be able to better understand what is necessary for NFIP compliance in general. This research may also be able to identify ways to add more environmental regulations to address climate change without those regulations interfering with NFIP, as seems to happen in Washington. As government entities in the United States begin to face the realities of climate change and the need for adaptation, new environmental regulations and programs will likely come about. After all, the NFIP as applied at the local level is not enough to make communities resilient to the flooding aspects of climate change. While the intentions behind this program and others may be good, and it may appear to the public that climate adaptation efforts are moving forward, implementation and compliance at the local level may still be a problem. Flooding will only worsen with climate change, so this problem must be taken seriously. New regulations and programs ought to be designed in a way to be implemented effectively by local governments, and they need to be different for the various types of communities with varying levels of organizational capacity. Future research could also dig into more detail on the NFIP's Community Compliance Monitoring Program and how it could be improved. Monday et al. 2006 found that the NFIP's approach to monitoring communities doesn't work for detecting all the compliance programs that need to be addressed through additional technical assistance or possibly enforcement action. That study, as well as more recent reporting from the New York Times, revealed community compliance issues and low levels of community monitoring. Another avenue for research would be further exploring how enhanced floodplain mapping could improve local programs. This could involve looking at measures of community performance in the years following adoption of augmented maps, such as NFIP compliance, changes in development regulations, number of floodplain permits, mitigation efforts, and the impacts of flooding events. The research could additionally dig into whether digital GIS-based maps lead to better regulatory compliance and identify the common issues communities have with floodplain mapping products. In small or rural communities where the organizational capacity for floodplain management may never be increased, other options should be considered, such as sharing a consultant between multiple jurisdictions or having state staff take over the floodplain permitting. Future research could explore these options and what they would require.